I never had much faith in miracles. I grew up in an orderly, solid church where the word was taught with respect but also with caution, as if the Holy Spirit had to move within established boundaries. Speaking in tongues, prophesying, too chaotic, too uncertain. My husband and I had even left a community a few years ago for that very reason. Too many emotional manifestations, too little control. We sought a sober, clean, doctrinally impeccable faith. Yet despite all our convictions, despite my discipline and my certainties, no one had prepared me for what was about to happen. It was January 13th, 2024. An unusually cold winter had hit Texas, and Dallas had woken up with a leaden sky and a layer of ice on the roads, crackling underfoot like broken glass. I remember the smell of old snow mixed with smog, and the strange silence outside the window, as if the entire city was holding its breath. That morning I was preparing for a small gallbladder surgery. Nothing serious, they told me. A laparoscopic procedure. It would last less than an hour. I could go home that same evening. My husband had taken me to the hospital early, and as we walked through the corridors, lit by cold, impersonal lights, I felt a slight twinge in my chest. I didn't pay attention to it. I was nervous, of course, but who wouldn't be before an operating room? I entered that white, sterile room with a calm that today I would call unconscious. They had placed me on the bed, attached the IVs, had me sign the last papers. The anesthesiologist was kind, with eyes that seemed used to watching life slip away and return. I remember he smiled at me and said, "A few deep breaths, Mrs. Moore, on my count of 3. Then the void. But it wasn't falling asleep. It was a silent explosion, a clean detachment, as if my soul had snapped away from my body with the violence of a broken cord. There was no tunnel, no light at the beginning. There was nothingness, but not a dark or threatening nothingness. It was rather the total absence of sound, time, weight, a threshold. And in that instant, even before I realized I was dead, my spirit knew. An acute, sudden awareness, like waking from a dream and remembering something fundamental that had been forgotten for years. The doctors would later say that my heart had stopped for 18 minutes, that my body had reacted extremely to the anesthesia, triggering fulminant anaphylaxis, that they had massaged my chest, intubated me, called for backup. But in those 18 minutes, I wasn't there. I wasn't in my body. I wasn't even in the world. When the light came, I didn't see it with my eyes. I felt it, like a melody that goes through your bones, like a childhood memory that returns with a scent. It wasn't blinding, but penetrating. And in the middle of that light, he was there. Not like in paintings, not like in movies. Jesus wasn't beautiful in the human sense of the term. He was truth. He was fire and peace together. He was pure presence. And I broke inside at his voice. "Valerie," he said, "only my name." But in that single name, I understood more than I had ever understood in a lifetime of Bible study. I understood who I was, who he was, and how much I had lived on the surface of a faith without depth. And then he added, "I want to show you something my children have misunderstood for too long. A forgotten, despised, ridiculed gift. Yet it is a weapon, a key, an eternal language that the enemy has tried to extinguish at all costs." At that moment, if I had still had a physical heart, it would have stopped beating for the second time. Because I knew deep down that everything I thought I knew about prayer, about gifts, about God, was about to be overturned. And I was about to see what no man can see without being transformed forever. I wasn't walking, yet I was moving. I wasn't breathing, yet I was alive as I had never been. The light that enveloped everything seemed to emanate from within me, as if my spirit was reflecting the glory of the one before me. Jesus did not speak to me with sounds, but with presence. Every word he addressed to me was born within my being, as if the truth had always been there, buried under years of doctrine, doubt, and religion. And now, finally, it was reawakening. He took my hand, or perhaps it was just a spiritual gesture, but I clearly perceived it. A gentle but unyielding grasp, as if to say, "You won't turn back from what you are about to see." And in an instant, the light opened before us like a curtain, revealing a space I can never adequately describe. It was like a living library, but without walls or shelves, made only of light. Each volume was a fragment of eternity, transparent scrolls floating in the air, filled with symbols, words, melodies, and languages that did not belong to this world. Some writings pulsed as if breathing. Others sang in celestial tones. Yet everything was in perfect order. Nothing was out of place. No word was there by chance. Jesus led me to one of these scrolls. It was brighter than the others, almost alive, as if it knew I was observing it. When it opened, I saw something that made me hold my breath, if I had still had lungs. All the languages of the earth paraded before my eyes, from ancient Sumerian tablets to Sanskrit, from dead languages to tribal dialects, from mathematical codes to the purest sounds ever uttered by human lips. But in the midst of all this, I perceived one, unique, hidden, powerful, that belonged to no nation. It was not earthly, it was not writable, yet it was within me. "Valerie," Jesus said, and his voice was like a river that washes away lies. "This is the language I have given my children to communicate with me, beyond the mind, beyond logic, beyond the words they know. It is the language of the Spirit. It is the gift of tongues. It is my voice in them." I felt a wave of warmth pass through me. It wasn't emotion. It was recognition. It was as if my spirit cried out, "Yes, I knew this, but I had forgotten it." Jesus looked at me with a gaze that held both tenderness and gravity. "This gift has been ridiculed, misunderstood, manipulated. Some use it to draw attention to themselves. Others fear it. Many ignore it altogether. But in the kingdom, Valerie, it is one of the most powerful weapons ever entrusted to my children." The images changed suddenly. I saw a woman kneeling in a dark room, speaking in a language I didn't recognize, but every word that came out of her mouth turned into light, rising like arrows towards the sky. Around her, dark creatures fled, like insects burned by the light. Then, I saw a young man in Africa, praying as he walked among the huts. His words traced invisible paths, opening ways where before there were only spiritual barriers. "Every time one of mine speaks in tongues," Jesus said, "heaven moves, the enemy retreats, the battle turns." Then with a gesture, Jesus lifted the scroll and closed it. But it was not a gesture of an end. It was an invitation to discover more. "I want to show you how the enemy has tried to break this language. I want you to see what happens when it is used with faith and what happens when it is rejected. But first, I will show you how it all began." And with those words, the vision began to change form. The sky darkened, the ground turned to ancient stone, and on the horizon, a towering structure rose into the clouds. The landscape was transforming before me as if time itself was bending. The light of the library receded, like mist sucked into the sky, leaving me in a new scene, ancient and heavy, charged with a primordial energy that tasted of defiance and fall. I was floating above a vast, desolate plain, and beneath me rose a city I had never seen, yet knew. The walls were thick, of clay and fire, and at the center of it all stood an immense, unfinished tower that seemed to want to scratch the sky. Men moved like ants around the base, lifting blocks, chanting in an ancient, rhythmic, almost hypnotic language. Their eyes did not look towards the sky with adoration, but with ambition, a clear, ruthless ambition that sought to reach God without God. "This," Jesus said, appearing beside me, "is Babel. but not as it is told in children's stories. I want you to see what happened in the spirit, not just in history. I looked again, and this time I saw beyond matter. Around the tower, dark spirits moved like architects of human pride. They fueled ideas, inspired phrases, suggested strategies. They were not ghosts of chaos. They were organized forces, determined to make man believe that he could dominate the spiritual world with the sole power of his own language, his own intellect. The language they spoke, Jesus continued, was not just a human means. It was the last remaining fragment of the original connection between heaven and earth. It was the shining tale of lost communion. But they used that gift to defy me, not to seek me. So I confused the languages, not as punishment, but as mercy. Because unity without truth is more destructive than temporary division. I was overwhelmed by the realization. Language is not just communication, it is authority. And at Babel, man had tried to create a kingdom without the king. Jesus pointed to the tower, which suddenly began to break from within. Not by lightning, not by an earthquake, but by the fragmentation of language itself. Men who a moment before worked in synchronicity now shouted at each other without understanding. Words became heavy, useless bricks. The construction site dissolved into anger, confusion, disorientation. The world had become silent, yet shouting. That day, said Jesus, spiritual language was fragmented, dispersed among the peoples. But I already had a plan. One day I would restore it, not through the Tower of Man, but through the cross. The scene changed again. I found myself in Jerusalem, in the upper room. Men and women prayed in silence, waiting, trembling, not knowing what was about to happen. Then, like a wind tearing through the doors of the soul, the Holy Spirit descended, and the tongues returned. Not the tongues of the flesh, but those of the Spirit. Not to build towers, but to proclaim the kingdom. Pentecost, Jesus whispered with a smile, is the answer to Babel. At Pentecost I restored to my church what had been stolen, the language of heaven. But even today, many still despise it, ridicule it, or fear it, as if they were afraid to speak the language the Father intended for them from the beginning. I felt deeply moved. I myself had avoided it, judged it, rejected it. How many times had I thought it was just fanaticism? How many times had I turned my back on those who prayed in tongues, feeling superior in my composure? Jesus looked at me. There was no condemnation in his eyes, only truth and love. I will now show you what happens in the invisible world when my children use this gift. You will see why the enemy has done everything to silence it, and you will see what happens when it is rediscovered. The sky opened like a vision upon vision, and I was ready. When Jesus spoke those words, "You will see what happens in the invisible world when my children use this gift," something inside me aligned like the strings of an ancient instrument that had never truly been played, and it was as if the entire sky held its breath for an instant. The vision opened before me like a stage without curtains. I was now above the earth, but I did not see it as a geographical map. It was alive. It pulsed like a body under attack. Large cities appeared as red incandescent nodes, places of intense spiritual activity. But the real movement took place in the heavens and in the depths. There were battles everywhere. I saw believers kneeling beside their beds, in small rooms, messy kitchens, cars parked in lots, silent woods. And their mouths moved without their minds fully comprehending. They spoke in tongues, and every word that came out transformed into a fiery trail, a spear that pierced the darkness above them. Some phrases became shields, others arrows of light, still others spiritual explosions that shook entire regions. "This is what Satan does not want my children to see," said Jesus. His voice was firm, but laden with gentle authority. "The gift of tongues is not noise. It is strategy. It is precision. It is the perfect prayer that cannot be intercepted." Then I saw the other side, the counterpart, a dark kingdom, organized like an army. Rows of demons gathered in what looked like a command center. They were not disorganized or chaotic as I often imagined them. They were organized, intelligent, methodical. They had maps, names, assignments. They tracked the habits of believers. They studied when they were most tired, most vulnerable, most discouraged. And their primary mission was one: to interrupt spiritual prayer. Distract them, one said. Fill their minds with anxiety, making them believe they are just babbling meaningless words. Make them feel like they are wasting their time, another hissed. Let's use their own churches to quench the fire, still another said. Let's put men in pulpits who speak against the gift, who ridicule it, who reduce it to an emotion to be repressed. I saw them send spirits of distraction, phones ringing in the middle of prayer, crying children, sudden emergencies. Other demons specialized in suffocating faith, insinuating, "This gift is not for you. It's madness. It's fanaticism." Then Jesus showed me a woman who was about to receive the gift of tongues. She was alone in a room, kneeling, her hands trembling. Her lips were moving, but they stopped each time. "I'm making it all up," she thought. "Maybe I'm going crazy." Around her, demons stirred in panic, as if they knew that if only she uttered those words with faith, something would break forever. And the moment she did, a faint, incomprehensible whisper, a luminous explosion broke the atmosphere, and I saw chains break, walls crumble, and an angel descend with a sword in hand. "You see, Valerie," Jesus said, "the enemy does not fear studied words. He fears what comes from the Spirit united to mine. Tongues are my divine code, a direct line that bypasses every filter, every fear, every corrupted rationality. That's why he has done everything to make it ridiculous. Because what burns his strongholds is what he cannot comprehend." The images changed again. I saw an elegant church, full of polite people, sitting in silence. The preaching was clean, doctrinal, orderly. But above the building, a gray shroud of spiritual silence. No light, no movement. Then I saw a small group in a modest house, with hands raised, silent tears, and tongues flowing like torrents. And above them, the sky was wide open. "It's not the form that matters. It's the hunger," Jesus said. "I give the Spirit to those who seek me with a sincere heart, not to those who put me in a doctrinal cage. And now I will show you the 4 uses of tongues in my body, and why each of them is essential." I prepared myself. I knew that what was coming would change not only me, but anyone who heard this story. The sky opened before me like a living scroll, and Jesus told me, "Now I want to show you the 4 ways in which the gift of tongues operates on earth. They are not accessories, but arteries of the Spirit, and without them, my body weakens." The first scene took me to a crowded square in Africa, under a blazing sky, where a young evangelist preached with power. His heart was pure, but the words he used were not enough to reach the crowd who listened with empty stares. Then, as if a fire had passed through him, he began to speak in a language he did not know. His lips uttered words that sounded like music, words I myself did not understand. But I saw the eyes of the crowd light up, their mouths open in amazement. Some fell to their knees. "He's speaking our language," cried a woman weeping. "He's proclaiming the name." Jesus whispered to me, "This is the first use, a sign for unbelievers, a sign that I am real, that I speak every language of the heart. No man can force it, but when it happens, the chains of unbelief are broken." The scene changed. I found myself in a small church in the Balkans, hidden in the mountains. An old man was praying in tongues during the service. It was a hushed murmur, almost a love song. Then suddenly, there was silence, and a young woman raised her voice in the local language, interpreting word for word. It was a direct, precise message, sweet and strong as a sword. Tell the son that I have heard his tears. He will come home." A man at the back of the room cried out, fell to his knees. It was his son the message was talking about. "This is the second use," said Jesus. "Tongues with interpretation, like prophecy. It is my way of edifying, correcting, comforting. The enemy has tried to destroy this gift by making every word seem like confusion, but I still act this way, in hidden places, in willing hearts." Then I was led to a dark room, where a lonely woman knelt. She had no words to say. Her heart was broken. She had lost everything: husband, job, dignity. But her lips moved, and words she herself did not understand flowed like water from a rock. I saw angels gather, demons flee, and heaven respond. They were not just words, they were spiritual frequencies, perfect intercession. "This," said Jesus, "is the third use. Tongues as intercessory prayer. When you don't know how to pray, the Spirit does it for you, and it does it precisely, targeted, like a doctor who knows the exact cure. If only my children knew how powerful this act is. Praying like this changes history." Finally, I found myself in front of a mirror. I saw myself with my mouth closed, my eyes full of questions, but inside, a subtle desire. And suddenly, I saw myself sitting in my room, shortly before dying, in one of those rare moments when I had tried to pray in tongues alone, but had stopped myself. Yet, a faint light had emanated from my heart, like a signal that had crossed the darkness and reached Jesus. "This," he told me, "is the fourth way. Tongues is personal, intimate prayer. You don't always need to shout. Sometimes it's a whisper between spirit and spirit, a secret language between you and me that no one else can understand. It's like a kiss from the soul. It's pure love, and it is also the most neglected." I found myself in silence. The images had deeply shaken me. They were not just scenes. They were real lives, hearts, tears, joys. Every expression of the gift of tongues was a direct channel to heaven, a spiritual artery that Satan would do everything to block. And I had lived for years, without ever using it. Jesus looked at me once more with those eyes that do not judge, but awaken. "Valerie, it's time to tell my people that the celestial language is not a relic of the past. It is the language of the final hour. It is returning, and I will use it to awaken, to liberate, to separate. Prepare yourself," Jesus told me, "because now you will see what not many are ready to accept. My church in the time of separation, not one of denominations or labels, but the one that forms around the voice of the Spirit." And immediately I was transported into a vision so intense that my heart seemed to beat within every scene. I found myself above an immense plain, and before my eyes stretched the universal church, but not as a structure or an organization. I saw it as an expanse of lamps, each representing a believer, a community, a nation. Some shone brightly, others were faint, many completely extinguished. Jesus stretched out his hand and a breeze began to blow. It was the Holy Spirit, but not like a dove, not like fire. It was a precise, targeted, living wind, seeking those souls willing to receive it in fullness. And where it found open hearts, something amazing happened. People began to pray in tongues, and the tongues transformed into flames that connected with each other, like golden threads forming a celestial network over the world. I saw entire families kneeling, fathers raising their hands, children praying in tongues without ever having been trained, underground churches in China, tents in the desert, solitary missionaries, small groups in European suburbs, and above them, an open sky. But then I also saw the other side, a silent but fierce resistance, pastors who preached against the gift, accusing it of being emotional extremism, communities that said, God can do anything, but not this way. And every time the gift was rejected, a crack opened in the lamp, and the light faded. I saw churches once fervent become cold, empty structures, illuminated only by their own intellect, and above them a dense, silent, deadly spiritual fog. Jesus looked at me and said, "It is no longer the time for neutrality. The language of the Spirit is becoming the dividing line, not between those who know and those who don't know, but between those who hunger and those who are afraid." He then showed me a group of believers who had received the gift but had hidden it, for fear of judgment, out of human respect. Their mouths were as if sealed by threads of shadow, and every time they tried to speak, they turned to check who was watching them. "They fear man more than me," he said sadly. "But a time will come, and is already arriving, when only those who walk in the Spirit will survive the great shaking." Then I saw an older vision, as if time itself was bending. Babylon. Not Nebuchadnezzar's, but the spiritual modern one, dressed in gold and doctrine, sitting on a throne made of religious power and compromise. In its mouth there were no tongues, only laws. In its eyes there was no fire, only control. "Behold," said Jesus, "the false body. It speaks of me, but does not know me. It fears disorder more than it craves truth. But I will use the heavenly language to expose its barrenness. The Spirit will divide what man has united for convenience." I felt myself tremble. It was all so clear, so real. The gift of tongues was not just a tool for personal edification. It was an invisible mark, a sign of belonging to a living prophetic church, willing to seem foolish to remain faithful to the Spirit. And Jesus concluded, "He who has ears to hear, let him hear. For my voice will speak again as in the beginning, not with persuasive words of human wisdom, but with power and spirit. And he who prays in tongues will be my watchman, my trumpeter, my invisible prophet." I don't remember the exact moment I re-entered my body, but I can tell you that the return was more painful than the departure. It was as if the soul was compressed, crushed to re-enter a form too tight. The breath that brought me back to life was not a gentle sigh, but a broken groan. I woke up in the hospital, surrounded by cold lights, machines, confused voices. But my heart was elsewhere. Or rather, it was new. A doctor shouted something. A nurse dropped her clipboard. "She's breathing. She's coming back." But I didn't feel fear. I didn't feel confusion. I felt a silent urgency, a calling that burned within like a fire held back for too long. I wanted to scream, but not out of panic. I wanted to tell everything, to recount everything. But I knew the world wouldn't understand. It took days before they let me go home. Days when I felt caught between two worlds. I could no longer talk about the weather, the news, my future job. Everything seemed useless to me. What I had seen was not a dream. It was more real than anything earthly. The first thing I did when I was alone was kneel in my room. And for the first time in my life, I prayed in tongues, not as a forced emotion, not as a group experience, but as a natural language flowing from the Spirit. It was as if I had been waiting my whole life for that moment, as if my tongue and my heart had finally aligned with heaven. The words flowed, sweet, strong, powerful. And with them, tears. I didn't know what I was saying, but I knew who was listening to me. The next night I dreamt of Jesus' face again. He didn't speak to me, but he looked at me as only he can. In that gaze was a mandate, and inside me a voice said, "Speak, tell, explain that the gift is not dead, that it is not just for fanatics or for ancient times. Tell them they are walking without wings. that they are fighting without a sword, that they are surviving when they could live in fullness. And since then, I haven't stopped. Every person I meet, every community that invites me to speak, every time I share my testimony, I say it clearly. The language of the Spirit is alive. It is real. It is for you. You don't have to be perfect or holy or a pastor. You need hunger. You need a thirst for truth. You need a heart willing to seem crazy to be full. Some take me seriously. Some laugh. Some call me crazy. It doesn't matter. I died, and I came back. And if heaven sent me back here, it's not to return to my old life. It's to tell you who are reading. Do not despise the gift. Do not fear the language you don't understand. Open your heart. The Spirit prays within you with groans too deep for words. Let it speak. Let it love. Let it live. Because in these last days, theology will not save us. Neither pulpits nor strategies will. It will be the voice of the Spirit, speaking from willing hearts. And if that language flows in you, you will recognize the true children, and they will recognize you. I am Valerie, and my final advice, the last I leave you with, is this. Accept the fire. Open your mouth, and let heaven speak through you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for making it to the end of this testimony. If you are still here, it is because something has deeply touched your spirit. Now we ask you for a small gesture that can have an immense impact. Write in the comments which country you are following us from, so we can also pray for your land. If you haven't already, subscribe to the channel and activate the bell to not miss the next spiritual revelations. And above all, share this video with at least 3 people you love. Family, friends, brothers and sisters in faith. A simple gesture can awaken a conscience, bring hope, and lead a heart back to God. May the Lord bless you and guide you in truth today and always.